We had filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the National Credit Union Association asking for documents essentially about critical race theory. And they gave us documents that show that employees were forced to undergo inclusion and unconscious bias training from the agency. The other big scandal is this crazed critical theory that's infecting our nation. And you see elements of it all over. You see it in our government, you see it in our schools, you see it in our military, you see it in our corporate culture. I mean, you're seeing that in Florida. I'll talk about Florida briefly before I get into this, where you had the Florida state legislature and the governor there, DeSantis, sign into law a bill that prevents inappropriate sexual identity and other type related talk with young school children. And the left went apoplectic again about that. That's critical theory. You've got to start talking to kids about these issues, whether it be sex or race or in inappropriate, hardcore, extremist ways. The earlier, the better. And of course, the media now has decided that anyone who opposes that is the worst person in the world. President Biden, the Biden White House has decided anyone who opposes that is the worst person in the world. And then the Disney company comes out and says they're in favor of it. They're in favor of protecting the ability of school teachers and third parties to engage in sexual talk with young children in our schools. So that's their corporate policy. And people in Florida are horrified at it. And voters in Florida, through their elected representatives in the state legislature there, passed a law restricting or retracting a special tax district that Disney had been given back in the late 60s that gave them certain financial benefits, tax benefits, and other governance benefits. They were essentially able to kind of run their own community down there. And they said, no more. You know, if you're going to be a political operation engaged in efforts to try to influence our children in our schools, well, why would we subsidize that? And why would we give you special benefits that are not available to other corporations generally? But it shows you that Disney was willing to put all of its corporate identity on the line to push this radicalism, this critical theory. There's critical race theory. Another flavor of it is critical gender theory. And then there's critical queer theory. They're all pieces of the same pie, which is a Marxist remaking of man, right? That the traditional structures of government, of society, and the traditional structures that govern humanity need to be torn apart. We need to go to war against religion, their thinking is. We need to go to war against our system of economics. And in the case of the sexual extremism, our biology. Because all that gets in the way of the revolution. And we'll tell you what to think the left thinks. And we need the people to be malleable and to have no way of thinking about the world other than through the Marxist revolutionary perspective. And we see that in our government. You know, this theory is the animating theory and narrative of the Biden administration. Everything they do is based on pursuing critical race theory and related measures. And I shouldn't say everything they do, but that's their, it's like the corporate guy shows up and says, we're going to be pushing this. Now they may be building widgets, but they're pushing all this radical agenda items on their employees in the meantime, and it's going on in the government. I mean, we've exposed it repeatedly, sued about it in our schools and on the feds, and we just got new documents. I don't think we needed even to sue for these documents, so there's a victory for the rule of law, at least. So we had filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the National Credit Union Association asking for documents essentially about critical race theory. And they gave us documents that show that employees were forced to undergo inclusion and unconscious bias training from the agency. Now, what is the National Credit Union Association, credit union agency? Well, it regulates credit unions. So if you have a credit union, they're their regulator. So you probably never heard of it before, but it's an important agency, at least with respect to our financial system. And then there's this big push in there about microaggressions, which again are supposed transgressions that are unintentional, yet supposedly harmful and toxic. But this is radical propaganda that is racialist and racist because it usually targets and is designed to target men and whites. And it also treats blacks like they're just victims and they can't be treated any way other than as victims. So it's paternalistic in that regard. I mean, the left hates everything. They do. They don't support the groups they say they support. They have contempt for them. I'm talking about the extremist left. Unconscious bias. I mean, that's critical race theory in two words. You don't even know you're racist because you've been created and you've lived in a system of a systematic racist country. So you're racist without even knowing it. And you need to be deconstructed. Your thinking needs to be deconstructed in programs like this. So they're supposed to be regulating the national credit unions across the country, and they're forcing these employees, these federal employees, to go through this brainwashing program that objectifies them by race and sex usually. They're forced to watch a film, for instance, or I shouldn't say they're forced to, but they're invited to watch a film. There's a whole office there, Office of Minority and Women Inclusion, which is alienating to anyone else who isn't a minority or a woman, right? So there you go. You've already got that racial separatism there. They're invited to watch a film, Race, the House We Live In, which is the first film about race to focus not on individual attitudes, but on the ways our institutions and policies advantage some groups at the expense of others. Its subject is the unmarked race. We see how benefits quietly and often invisibly accrue to the majority, not necessarily because of hard work. Again, there's that attack on hard work, because hard work is racist too, by the way. But because of the racialized nature of our laws, courts, customs, and perhaps more pertinently, housing. The email describes their talks as, quote, a safe place to have difficult conversations about race, identity, privilege, unconscious bias, cultural appropriation, and a host of other thought-provoking topics. I mean, it's a Marxist group meeting. There's a talk called Deconstructing White Privilege. Can you imagine if they had something saying, highlighting or deconstructing black privilege? People would be outraged, and rightly so. And they sent out this other news item highlighting and we've got just more and more examples of this, and I encourage you to go to our website and look at them directly, about the microaggressions. Again, which are supposed affronts that people who are on the alleged wrong end of them can take from perfectly innocent comments or even thoughtless comments in terms of not having any ill motive behind them. Like, for instance, a microaggression can include naming all the buildings or rooms after, quote, white men, and white is capitalized. By the way, capitalizing white and black is racist. I mean, that's just like reminds one of the South African apartheid system. That's how crazed the left has become. They've come full circle from wanting to shut down the South Africans for having apartheid to embracing their racial segregationist policies by labeling people as white and black in a capital way, using capitalized letters that track and guide their entire interactions with society. Americans should be disturbed that the Biden administration is using the agency responsible for regulating credit unions to subject employees and the public to an extremist and discriminatory critical race theory ideology that attacks individuals based on race and other issues. And again, it's not just the employees that are forced to go through this. They want the whole agency to enforce the laws according to critical race theory. So under the guise of, quote, under the guise of fighting systemic racism, they're going to actually engage in systemic racism. I mean, that's I shouldn't say the irony, but it's one of the big lies and shell games they're playing with us here. They pretend that they're combating systemic racism when in fact their goal is to institute systemic racism. Or more specifically, Marxism. So critical race theory is a threat to our country. It can tear the country apart. It's illegal, in my view, and unlawful, and it ought to be opposed, and we're going to expose it and oppose it anywhere, everywhere we can, with your support, of course.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch all the latest news from Judicial Watch.